Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Tech Talk with Bill Baer. My name is Dan Holm, and I am joined by Mr. Bill Baer himself. And of course, despite our numerous tech checks, there we go. There, the webcam's working. Good morning, Bill. How are you? Yeah,
Good morning, Dan. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona, where I'm going to be participating in SharePoint Intersection next week. And it looks like you're back at home.
Yeah, back in suburbia Seattle, just trying to get caught up. Can't believe that Ignite was just a week ago. Seems like a lot longer.
Yeah, it was. How was the event for you?
Oh, it was great. I think we definitely used it as an opportunity, to plan for next time. So there, not only did we have a lot of great things to share at Ignite, but we also learned a lot about how we can make it even more successful when we return to Chicago in just a little under a year from now. So it's hard to believe we're already kind of kicking the gears to get planning for the next Ignite. But, this is going to be an iterative process. I think the next one's going to be even more awesome than this one. So, like I said, we learned a lot from this particular event. We heard a lot of the attendee feedback. We've been taking it to heart to make sure that this is a great event. I think content-wise, we did a pretty good job. And I know on the SharePoint side, there was a little concern that there maybe wasn't enough SharePoint content, but we did want to make sure that we had the right balance. And looking forward, we've also taken into account that feedback as well. The good news is by this time next year, we'll be talking about SharePoint differently, because we'll have a lot more to share around 2016. Obviously, we're a year out from Ignite, so we're going to have a ton of work to do between now and then, which will definitely ensure that you have a ton of content around not only 2016, but also 2013, the path forward. If you're an on-prem customer and you're looking towards the cloud, or you opt to remain on-prem, or if you're going to fall somewhere in between through hybrid or cloud accelerated scenarios. So I think we're going to have a ton of great stuff this time that addresses kind of, hey, where's all the SharePoint content? There's definitely going to be more as we move forward into Ignite 2016.
Well, all the Microsoft events, TechEd in the past, SharePoint conference, they're always a little bit future leaning. And so I think the amount of content was actually excellent. You had great content on 2016, as much as you could have this far in advance, and obviously a lot of great content on Office 365. And if your announced roadmaps are on track, this time next year at Ignite should be a very good time for SharePoint 2016, I would assume. Uh,
Oh yeah, it's
and
definitely.
so, so I assume you listened to everyone's feedback, and the big change next year at Ignite, we might as well announce right now, every single attendee will get a segue to use during the event.
Yeah, so that's one of the biggest challenges is obviously you need a venue that can accommodate 20 plus thousand individuals. And, at the same time, those are, far and few between that can really accommodate that large of a group converging on one area at one given point in time. So, there's kind of the downside, which is obviously the commute. And maybe because we're up here in Seattle and it takes about 2 hours to go 20 miles, anyway, a 4 mile commute doesn't seem too bad. But the conference center initially to me looked a lot closer to the hotels than it actually ended up being. I remember on day one telling myself, I'll just walk. That was a
Ah,
mistake. So, but I
oh, and
think, like I said, we looked at it.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say,
I was
we
just going to
looked
say,
at
I didn't.
that. We got the feedback on it. So, we'll definitely have a better plan in place for next year.
Oh, and I actually didn't mean getting to and from the event. I meant getting around the event. We needed a segue. That place was ginormous. That was an amazing facility. Crazy, crazy big.
Yeah, I experienced that
And
personally. Definitely personally experienced
yeah.
that Sunday for the pre-day hybrid training, where having not been in the venue for that particular area within the venue, I decided that arriving at about 8:50 would give me plenty of time to get to the classroom by 9, and then that's before I realized that the distance between the North Hall and the East Hall basement is that like between Kansas and Nevada.
Yeah, and not exaggerating, it actually was a mile, according to my band, from the drop-off spot in the North Hall to that room that was completely on the diagonally opposite end of the venue. That was a crazy place. And for those of you who didn't get to Ignite, on one of the earlier shows this week, Jason Himmelstein and I were talking about Ignite next year. And having been there this year, it was crazy, it was big, but it was super valuable. And I'd like to say, from an outsider's point of view, that for anyone watching the show, when registration opens for next year's Ignite, you definitely should register quickly. Clearly, Microsoft has the ability to sell this stuff out. And go with a very targeted focus of what you want to see. Pick a handful of sessions that are really critical to you, and then take advantage of all of the networking opportunities. The expo floor I found was super valuable. The opportunity to just hang around and talk with people, that stuff was super, super valuable. And of course, the sessions that I wanted to go to, I got to, and the rest of them I'm in the process of downloading and watching offline. So watch for that Ignite registration next year when it goes live. But enough talk about the event. We're here to talk about what you talked about at the event, SharePoint 2016, and to answer people's questions. So let's go ahead and switch into Q&A mode. We're going to jump straight into that this week, rather than have Bill talk about a single topic, as we do most of the time on this show. We're going to open it up to Q&A. So Lyman, if you want to switch into that layout, that would be great. And as we get ready to do Q&A, you will now see a questions for presenters module that's appeared right smack dab in the middle of the screen. That's where you can queue up questions for Bill. We don't have the ability to stay on top of chat as we're in the process of talking, so please do enter them in there. And that also allows us, if there are questions we can't get to during the course of the event, to come back and answer them later. And just to give you a quick overview of what's going to happen today and into the future, for those of you who've been watching the show, Bill has come on every 2 weeks to talk about a topic and then answer questions. But he hasn't been able to really say everything because the announcements hadn't been made yet. Now, the cat's out of the bag. There's a lot of stuff that's been said. And after today's Q&A, we're going to have each Tech Talk focused on a topic about SharePoint 2016 that Bill will be able to go into in detail and answer questions around. And the order in which we do those topics will be based very heavily on your questions today. So you'll help drive the content plan for the show for the next couple of months. And just so you know, the next show is already planned. It is 2 weeks from today, and the topic we've already picked for that one because we needed to pick one in advance, and it is going to be the new deployment and configuration option in SharePoint 2016 called min role. So next show in 2 weeks is min role. After that, the content plan is going to be very much up to the questions that you guys asked today and what we see as interesting topics for you. So we're starting to get questions pouring into the queue. Bill, I think your camera is frozen.
Okay, hold on.
Let me pause and unpause. That usually fixes that. Do a little dance for everyone while we wait for Bill to come back. By the way, while he's not visible, and I had a great time with this one. He threw a great party at the SharePoint. He really did a great job for the community there at Ignite. Bill, you're still frozen, darn it.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's going on with my camera at the moment. Let me work on that and just start answering some questions, and we can all just stare at you awkwardly while we do so. So I'm going to go ahead and work from the bottom up from what I can see on the screen right now, starting with Dave's question, which is around workflows in SharePoint 2016. So obviously from a workflow perspective, we're looking at a number of different things. We had some plans as related to Office 365, which we've recently postponed as we kind of reevaluate and rethink what our workflow strategy is as we move forward into the future. We definitely want to make sure that we do the right thing from a forms and workflow perspective that aligns to today's modern work experiences. So in light of some of the decisions, what we've opted to do in the near term in order to address workflow is we're going to bring forward InfoPath form services into SharePoint 2016. In addition to bringing those capabilities forward, we'll also continue to support the use of InfoPath 2013 from a client perspective with SharePoint 2016. So you'll still have those options available to you from a workflow perspective. We don't have any plans in 2016 to deprecate any of the 2013 workflow capabilities, some of which are obviously Workflow Foundation and Workflow Manager, kind of being representative of the two ways that you do workflow in 2013. We'll also bring those forward into SharePoint 2016 as well. And then in parallel, what we're doing is thinking about our workflow strategy moving forward. And obviously, from a release cadence perspective, we don't anticipate substantially changing anything from what we do today, so we'll continue to update the cloud first, and then we'll try to identify the right investments that we can accrue back to our on-premises customers. So, what we talked about a year ago in a lot of our sessions is really to understand our trajectory for on-premises to a certain degree. You want to keep an eye on what we're doing in the cloud, and then because that's generally the way that we look at things these days, and that's the key differentiator between the ways that we used to build the product, where we talked about it at Ignite, in which our on-premises product used to really be the definition of what our online product is representative of. So if you think back all the way to 2004 and forward, when we first embarked on this cloud journey, we always took our on-premises product and then enabled it in the cloud. So we built it for on-premises, but we brought it forward to the cloud. And then 2016 is our first opportunity to really look towards the cloud to define on-premises. Now, a number of questions have come up, particularly around workflow and other capabilities, around things that we've deprecated in the cloud, and what does that mean for on-premises? So from an on-premises perspective, when we think about deprecations, obviously those things that exist in 2013, that we've shipped in 2013, we need to carry forward from a backwards compatibility perspective and to enable you to upgrade to SharePoint 2016. So because we've taken something out of Office 365 or SharePoint Online, doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't exist in the on-premises product moving forward, because we still look at those two solutions a little bit differently because they're two unique or discrete use cases for online and on-premises. Capabilities like Exchange integration inside of Office 365, between SharePoint Project and Exchange. We've evolved those over time. So as you've seen, we've moved into the concept of tasks and planners. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to take work management capabilities that existed in 2013 and not deliver them in 2016. So work management obviously was a specific feature we designed for on-premises utilization that we brought forward to the cloud. We found a better way to do it in Office 365, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to exist on on-premises. So, the moral of the story is deprecations in the service don't always mean deprecations on-premises. Looking at Jason's question that just popped up, and I'm still troubleshooting the camera here. A list
Actually,
of on... Yeah.
Before you have questions, real quick, Bill, so just to sort of put a nutshell around it, if people are currently using SharePoint 2010 style workflows or SharePoint 2013 style workflows, those will continue to be supported in on-prem SharePoint 2016.
Indeed.
Awesome. Great. That will definitely make a lot of people feel more comfortable. That's awesome news.
So that's kind of an easy way to look at that, particular question around capabilities that have existed on premises that there's concern that we won't bring them forward, but we definitely will. And that kind of leads me into Jason's next question, which is
one more follow-up.
Yeah.
For you. Sorry. I just want to highlight something you said so that as we break this into little bits, we can. You mentioned as far as the moving forward story, that as you guys are thinking about workflows, it sounded to me like you were saying that the way your teams are envisioning and planning for workflows, it really is sort of a matter of fitting workflows and forms together. They're being thought of in the same conversation as opposed to two separate things. Is that right?
Yeah, I think workflow and forms, which used to be two discrete scenarios, have over time converged. And
Wonderful.
the best way to look at those things moving forward is through a convergence story. One begets the other. So, definitely as we think forward, it's really looking at workflow and forms not as two discrete capabilities or offerings, but really how do you pair them together in a way that makes sense for users.
Fantastic. That's great news.
And
All right.
I
Now,
should add
let's move.
at the
Go ahead.
I was going to add at the same time, you know, kind of keeping on that topic, one of the other things that we think about as well is really kind of focusing on the end user experience from an IW tooling perspective. Now, generally, when we've looked at workflow in the past, even forms in the past, they've really been intended for power users or pro devs. And as we look forward in those particular scenarios, it's really about enabling the end users to participate in those capabilities without having to solicit the experience of a pro developer to build a workflow in Visual Studio, or the expectation of a power user building forms in Designer or workflows in Visio, and really kind of trying to take those capabilities and make them more appealing to the end user so they resonate better across the business.
Awesome. You're still there, right, Bill?
I am still here. Can you hear me?
All right. Yeah. So there's a follow-up question here from Rebecca. Uh, are you considering buying a third-party product to handle forms and workflows in the future?
Wow, that would be one that I couldn't even that would be one that I couldn't even answer for you. Even if I knew the answer, or even if I wanted to, that wouldn't be a question that I could answer. Definitely a difficult one, but it's not one that we would comment on.
Absolutely. So the answer, Rebecca, is either A, it's above Bill's pay grade, or B, he'd have to kill us all if he told us. So either way, to be not to be answered today. And then, did you want to pick the next question that you saw in the queue there?
Yeah, I was looking at Jason's, which is kind of a list of on-prem features that have been or will be backported. So kind of the way I would explain this one is we don't have kind of a master list of consolidated features. Not that it would be hard to pull one together related to this particular question, but the way to think about SharePoint 2016 is because we looked at the cloud. Effectively, what we did is we forked our SharePoint Online branch of code at a given point in time. So think of that as almost a snapshot of what SharePoint Online looks like. And then from a planning perspective, we looked at what exists in SharePoint Online today that can be packaged up and printed on a DVD for all intents and purposes. Then we identified those things that didn't fit within that objective and thought about how we can bring those to you through hybrid experiences. So great examples of which would be the Office Graph, Delve, some new Yammer integration experiences, a number of different things that just can't be packaged up as an executable and delivered to our customers. And then the last thing that we did was identifying new discrete features that would provide value to our on-premises customers, really addressing some of the feedback that we've seen over the course of the past 3 years. So that's kind of the three ways that we looked at it. Now, in between all of that, we also look back to 2013 because SharePoint Online isn't representative of all the capabilities that SharePoint 2013 delivered. So in those cases, when we did make that fork to build SharePoint 2016 from SharePoint Online, we started to backport a lot of the capabilities that existed in 2013. Effectively, we backported all of the capabilities that existed in 2013 that don't exist in SharePoint Online. So, at the end of the day, we don't have any plans to deprecate any of the capabilities that existed in 2013. We intend to carry them all forward to SharePoint 2016, in addition to adding new value through accrual of SharePoint Online investments, hybrid investments, as well as new discrete investments. So you can almost think of SharePoint 2016 being representative of all of the goodness of SharePoint 2013, much of the goodness of SharePoint Online, in addition to new goodness to which we're still building. So there's kind of three value props, to this one product this time.
Fantastic. Hey, and Bill, why don't we go ahead and have you give a try to disconnecting and reconnecting and see if that solves Oh, wow. Just the threat of doing that brought your camera to life. All right.
Yeah, I actually fixed it. So apparently one of my USB ports decided to fail this morning.
I love when that happens. All right, cool. I'm glad we got you back visually here. So there was a follow-up question on workflows, which is what tools should we use to build SharePoint 2013 workflows in SharePoint 2016? And I assume that's related to the broader question of the future of SharePoint Designer.
Yeah, so if you think about SharePoint Online today, effectively you're looking at a lightweight aspect of what SharePoint 2016 would be. Now, obviously, you can still use Designer with SharePoint Online. You can still use Designer 2013 with SharePoint 2016. So if you did want to develop lightweight power user-esque workflows, you could definitely use SharePoint Designer as it exists today. Obviously, if you wanted to, you could still leverage Visual Studio to build workflows. And like I said, we're going to carry a lot of these capabilities forward. And as we think about it, as we think about what we're going to do moving forward, we'll definitely have some announcements, and those will most likely come through the Office 365 roadmap. So I think we're at an interesting point in time to where cloud and on-premises have converged. And the easiest way, like I said in the past, to understand it is think about Office 365 as where you see new features light up first. And then, keeping an eye on that, you can almost begin to decipher what our intent is for our on-premises product. But in terms of designing workflows in SharePoint 2016, you'll still have Designer available to you that will work with 2016, much like InfoPath will work with 2016. And in addition, you can still leverage capabilities like, obviously, Visual Studio. And then for those advanced workflows that we don't deliver natively as part of the product, or you don't endeavor to build through the, as a developer, which you can always do, as well as third-party products will definitely be able to answer a lot of the workflow and forms needs that don't exist in 2016.
Awesome. Hey, I'll toss you a question here. Jumping to a developer question, so we can hit some of our developers in the crowd. What are some of the development changes we should expect in SharePoint 2016? Specifically, any changes to the app/add-in model, and I'll add to that full trust code, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so from a development perspective, we want to do a number of different things. As one, we understand that one of the core value props for SharePoint over the course of its history has largely been its extensibility. Now, many customers tend to acquire SharePoint for the sum of all of its parts. It can do a number of different things. The Swiss Army knife description. It can do business intelligence. It can do enterprise content management, collaboration, social. There's a number of different capabilities or experiences that SharePoint delivers. But at the same time, really where the value was is its extensibility. You can make it do a number of different things on top of what is delivered out of the box. So we don't endeavor to change any of that from a value perspective. So full trust code will be brought forward into SharePoint 2016. You're going to see a broader server object model. So every time we release a new product, there's new capabilities associated, which means there's new endpoints that you can leverage as part of your development on top of the product. So to answer that question, full trust code will be brought forward into SharePoint 2016. Many of the capabilities that you see in 2013 will be brought forward. So sandbox solutions would still be a capability, or user code is still a capability in SharePoint 2016. Obviously, we'll carry forward the app model that we delivered in 2013 into 2016 with some notable improvements. We also will start sharing some information about a news story around hybrid apps and what we've done from that perspective. And then lastly, we also wanted to draw more parity between cloud and on-premises development for those customers who are on the journey to getting to Office 365. So from an Office 365 APIs perspective, we're going to carry that back to 2016. So you can expect to see things like subscription apps and common consent being brought down to the on-premises product as well. So effectively what it is taking forward what we've already done with improvements and then additive investments inclusive of a lot of the things that we've done in the cloud to enable people who develop on top of Office 365, particularly SharePoint Online.
Fantastic. So there's a couple of comments in chat just that were surprised, as I was. that you're saying the sandbox solutions will actually be continued to be supported in 2016? Because I think many of us were under the impression that that was going to be gone after 2013.
Yeah, so sandbox solutions, obviously, we've deprecated in favor of models that we felt worked better and were more indicative of that particular type of scenario, particularly the cloud app model. But we do understand at the same time that customers will carry forward sandbox code from 2013 that have built it there, and we need a way to support them. So, the way to support those particular scenarios isn't always saying lift and shift. Pick up your sandbox solutions and hurry up and redevelop them for the cloud app model for 2016. We definitely want to be, we definitely look at backwards compatibility seriously. So we'll bring forward, the ability to leverage sandbox solutions with 2016. We're still going to call it deprecated. We're still going to emphasize leveraging the cloud app model or some of the new developer investments in 2016 as opposed to that. But, we're definitely cognizant of getting people to 2016. And we don't want to make it inordinately difficult for you to get there. And one of the ways to do that is ensure we have a great backward compatibility story, which means bringing forward scenarios like user code.
That's fantastic. And there's a question related to the whole development story from Anthony that are there any other changes you can mention as far as apps for SharePoint 16, and specifically, is it going to be changed to add-ins? And I'd actually like to extend that question a little bit myself, which is in SharePoint 2013, everything became an app. Document libraries became an app, lists became an app. Is there going to be a change even just in the terminology that users see related to apps?
That's something that we're still working out. We're still working out our story for that. Today, what we have as part of the product for those, that saw some of the demonstrations and some of the and attended some of the discussions around 2016 at Ignite is what you see in 2016 today is largely initially going to look like, from an apps perspective, what existed in 2013. So things like document libraries and lists, calendar are all referenced as apps. And then obviously from an add-in perspective, that's something that is new to Office 365. So a lot of the terminology has changed in the cloud. And like I said, that's going to be one of those things that we look to on-premises to see if that change is going to accrue back there as well. The long story is it's definitely something we're looking at, and we don't have the best answer to at this particular point in time, but it is something that we're looking at. So it's a relatively new change to Office 365. And obviously our release cadence differs between on-premises and Office 365, so it does take us time to accrue some of these things back, which is why, when something's brand new to the service, we can't necessarily answer as to whether or not it comes to on-premises. For Oleg's question, HTML5, CSS, and responsive. So that's actually one of the things that we're thinking about. And we're early enough in the development cycle to where we can think about these things. So considering we're still a year away, that's a year away worth of development work that we still have to do to finalize SharePoint 2016. So we did look at user voice, and we saw that the number one ask was related to responsive design. So if you filter sharepoint.uservoice.com by top requests, you'll notice that responsive design bubbled up to be the number one ask that our customers have of us, and we've recently changed the status on a number of our top asks in user voice. The great news is of the top 10, over half of them we've decided that we're going to work on. So we're definitely taking that feedback seriously. So if you look at if you filter by the top and you look at the top 10, we've already marked half of those as things that we're working on, and we just updated responsive design to be something as per user voice terminology, thinking about. And thinking about means that we've got a lot of work ahead of us to figure out how to do it in the right way.
Fantastic. That's great news. And by the way, Bill, I don't know if we've mentioned this to you sort of in previous tech checks, but you can actually delete questions after you've answered them. It doesn't actually delete them from the system, but it allows you to keep the queue clear for yourself. I'll toss one to you if you'd like. Jason is asking what the future of Project Server is. Is it dead as a standalone SKU or product? What's the plan in 2016?
So we did a lot of work from a project server perspective to narrow the points of integration between the two products. So in the past, you had two discrete products that you are responsible for managing if you wanted SharePoint for collaborative purposes and project and portfolio management purposes. And then you would wire them together much like you would wire together Office web apps or any other technology that supports interoperability with SharePoint. And we thought long and hard about that particular scenario. And one of the things that we came to find is that where does the IP that a project or portfolio manager create live? And we found that that content resides inside of SharePoint. So naturally what we wanted to do was draw together those two products to put content and project and portfolio management closer together. So what we've decided to do is effectively integrate the two. Now that doesn't mean with SharePoint you get project for free. It's still licensed separately. So you still have a separate license key and you purchase project server separately, but it becomes a native part of SharePoint. It does a number of different things. As one, from a topology perspective, it reduces your data center footprint. So there's value from a COGS perspective. But at the same time, it brings, again, the content closer to project and portfolio management, which means those integration points are seamless as opposed to being delivered through interoperability. So I wouldn't look at it as a substantial change other than the fact that your topology gets smaller and better and the experience gets better. So whether you're on the receiving end of project, which means you're a project manager and you're creating projects and content, it gets better for you. If you're on the back end and you're IT and you're responsible for managing servers, it gets better for you too because of the consolidation work that we've done between the two products. I'm kind of going through here. There was a...
Let me follow up with that a little bit. So, consolidated topology, separate SKU, but I assume then that, well, tell me a little bit about how the bits for that kind of thing are going to work. Are those going to be bits that you download and add to your SharePoint environment separately? Are those going to be bits that light up when you enter your license key? How does that work, or has that been decided yet?
Yeah, and that's still one of the things that we're working on. But the idea of you can almost think of it as the same idea around SharePoint Standard and Enterprise Edition. So you acquire a product. That product obviously takes a license key, and then the license key dictates what features are lit up. So that's kind of one of the ways that we're looking at that particular scenario. But again, it's licensed separately. We talked a little bit about Ignite, about one of the things that we're doing, and which was more of an architectural diagram that showed the consolidation of project and into the SharePoint content database. So as opposed to having a separate project database, it's effectively all unified into a content database. And that was some of the work that we had talked about in the past, is we endeavor to do a lot of consolidation because it does minimalize things and make things a lot better in some cases. In some cases, consolidation doesn't make as much sense. So that's why, like FIM is a great example. Removing FIM as an integrated part of SharePoint for bidirectional profile synchronization and really moving it to a separate server and then enabling you to integrate more seamlessly with it.
On a similar note, Kevin is asking about other products that have been loosely or tightly coupled with SharePoint in the past, specifically Performance Point, Power BI, and DataZen.
Oh yeah, so Performance Point is representative of another one of those capabilities. It doesn't exist in the service that we backported for SharePoint 2016. So if you think about some of those things that have existed in the past as part of SharePoint 2016, or as part of SharePoint 2013, we'll carry those forward. And Performance Point is a great example of one of those things that didn't permeate in the cloud, but did exist in SharePoint 2013, which means for SharePoint 2016, it's one of those backported capabilities. So it's one of those ones that's brought forward much in the same way that we've delivered it as part of SharePoint 2013. It looks like there's a couple of questions from the other Kevin, but I want to grab the SQL question real quick.
Sure.
So it looks like SQL Server 2012 is not supported, and then in-memory tables, will we use those? Any issue with availability groups? So one of the things that we do from a product perspective is we generally take an N-2 approach from an operating system and database server perspective. We have to find a baseline that we build our product on top of. So for this particular case, our baseline became SQL Server 2014 and or SQL Server 2016. So effectively, if you've looked, we've stepped it up one level, a +1 from SharePoint 2013. From the OS side, same thing. Windows Server 2012 R2 or the next generation of Windows Server 10 is what we're looking at, or effectively what we used to call threshold, is going to be the highest supported with the lowest supported being 2012 R2. So typically what we do is we always take an N-2 approach to the database servers that we support as well as the operating systems we support. Some of that is by virtue of what we've tested and validated to work with 2016. Some of that is by virtue of dependencies that we may take on a particular product. For SharePoint 2016, what will we support? So obviously out of Ignite, a number of great things were talked about in the SQL Server space around new improvements to tables, around improvements to encryption through capabilities like transparent queryable encryption. And we've gotten a number of questions about, will you support any of those capabilities that are delivered in SharePoint or SQL Server 2016 with SharePoint 2016? The easy answer to that question right now is we'll fully support SQL Server 2016 with SharePoint 2016. What we don't know yet, because we haven't had an opportunity to test and validate, is whether or not we can support transparent queryable encryption. Now, obviously, we have work to do to test the scenario, make sure everything still works from a feature perspective, and then once we do that, we'll declare supportability. So today, it's a little bit too early for us to do so. Obviously, our first tangible version of SharePoint 2016 is only about 2 weeks old, and SQL Server is, they won't have a preview until summer. So theoretically, we could test on a 2-week-old product and a 2-month-old product, but that's not going to be representative of what our customers would expect to see in a production environment. So we want to make sure we both get our bits to the right place before we actually begin that testing. And then once we do that testing, we'll better understand what particular capabilities we'll be able to support. Next question, what about access services? Again, it's one of those ones that we would carry forward. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and then also related to that, Kevin's asking about Power BI and whether that's going to be coming to SharePoint 2016.
And I think the way you can look at Power BI is it's another one of those capabilities from a cloud perspective that's just inordinately difficult to put on a DVD and ship to customers. It was designed in the cloud, kind of born in the cloud and perfected in our data centers. So it's one of those ones that's difficult to just bring to on-premises as a wholesale proposition. But from a Power BI perspective, the other thing to understand really is the relationship between Power BI and SharePoint is different than the relationship between, say, a performance point in SharePoint. They're less related than they are more related. So, Power BI isn't kind of the evolution of some SharePoint BI capability as much as it is a standalone service that you can subscribe to. And I think a lot of people look at it as SharePoint, but it's not really SharePoint. It's more of a standalone business intelligence capability that exists as part of our cloud service. What that team is doing, because of its relationship to SharePoint, I'm not that close to it, but I know there are hybrid capabilities with Power BI through analysis services, cubes that perhaps reside on premises that can be leveraged with Power BI. But that's definitely a good question I'd love to follow up on. It's just that I'm not close to the team that works on Power BI. There was another one in here I saw a minute ago about document upload technology that we used to use. So the easy answer to that is in the past, what we've done from an upload and download chunking perspective is we've implemented what we used to call Cobalt, or file synchronization via SOAP over HTTP. When we introduced that in SharePoint 2010, the design objective was to mitigate the bandwidth consumption between the client and the server, particularly the client being the Office client, the server being SharePoint. Generally when users were editing documents, so if they had a large document and they made a small change, we wanted to only send the delta between the client and the server. But what tended to happen, or what did happen in SharePoint 2010, is when that delta was submitted between the client and the front-end web server, that web server would actually request a full copy of the document from the database server and then merge the changes in memory on the web server. So what we did was, while we mitigated a lot of the bandwidth issues between the client and the server, it introduced CPU consumption issues between the server and the database server, the front end and the database server, kind of in a nutshell. And I wrote up a long white paper on what all that looked like. Then we implemented shredded storage. We kind of evolved Cobalt, and that addressed the front end to back end problem. So that's kind of what we did in the past to address bandwidth consumption between front end and back end. Now, as we move forward, we've decided to land on background intelligence transfer service, or BITS, to facilitate prioritized, throttled, and asynchronous transfer of files between machines. And the way that BITS works is it uses idle network bandwidth. So to put it in kind of layman's terms, it only uses spare bandwidth. If an application's only using, say, 80% of the bandwidth, BITS will attempt to use the other 20% in order to facilitate the transfer. So we had to do some of that work because at the same time we announced a 10 gigabyte file upload threshold for SharePoint 2016. So in order to facilitate that, we looked at new protocols to address that particular scenario, and BITS, fit that perfectly. And actually, the iOS OneDrive client today, the OneDrive for Business client for iOS actually uses BITS for its transfer.
I didn't realize that, Bill. So BITS is something that I'm familiar with from my background with Windows Server. It's been used on the Windows side of the house for a long time. It's what Windows Server Update Services uses and other things. So you've now brought that corporate knowledge and that technology into the Office team to power OneDrive for Business and SharePoint 2016 moving forward?
Exactly.
Fantastic. Now, I assume that's really between the client and the server. Is BITS also being used between the server and the SQL Server? I assume not in that case, but
no. So that's kind of client-server relationship is where BITS comes in, and then as we move from server-to-server relationship, we've continued to evolve the shredded store implementation that we have today. So it's really finding a better protocol for client-server relationship, and one that could facilitate these large file uploads that we anticipate as a result of us changing max file size in SharePoint 2016. So, if you think about the way that Cobalt worked, Cobalt was a great way to address delta transfer between client and server, but it shared bandwidth with any other application that you were using, whereas, BITS is going to use spare bandwidth, which means that large file upload scenario works a lot better, a lot more efficiently, particularly for the user who's actually conducting the upload.
That's awesome. And so for those of you who are watching the show who are not familiar with BITS, I can tell you from my experience, it's a great technology. In fact, there was a partner in New Zealand or out of New Zealand who created a large file upload technology for SharePoint 2007 that used BITS. So I'm thrilled that that's being incorporated. Related to that, Bill, I'd like to ask a question that I don't think is in the queue, but or actually, no, it is. Kevin was extending the question to ask are there any changes in SharePoint 2016 that might impact someone's decisions regarding remote blob store and some of the third-party tools that allow you to take documents and store them outside of the SQL content database altogether?
Yes, so for SharePoint 2016, we'll continue to support RBS.
Excellent.
Moving forward. So obviously, as we moved into SharePoint 2010, we made a decision to move away from EBS, which was external blob storage, a proprietary COM-based implementation that we built, the SharePoint team, and we decided to rely upon our partner teams who focus on data engine type scenarios. So in 2010, we moved away from EBS and moved towards RBS, and we carried that forward through each subsequent release into 2013. We'll continue to carry that forward into 2016, so you can continue to use RBS with SharePoint 2016. A number of vendors are building solutions for RBS for SharePoint 2016, including our own StoreSimple, so you'll still have a number of different options available to you. So not much changes from an RBS perspective, other than we'll continue to support it and do the right thing for those particular scenarios. I'm looking at Marwan's comment on WCM. Microsoft is not investing in WCM features at all, Sitecore. I wouldn't say that we're not investing in WCM scenarios, and I think a lot of that is, the context behind that is people saw the public sites deprecation as part of Office 365 being indicative of us not focusing on WCM, and this is kind of one of those areas where I think the line between on-premises and online tend to get blurred. So, the public site scenario was a really great scenario for lightweight, simple websites, a scenario that could also be addressed in Windows Azure, probably in a more productive way in terms of its extensibility and the ability to make it do what you need to be able to do. Public websites were never really designed for digital marketing purposes. So, developing a .com wasn't the intent of a public website because they just generally wouldn't meet that need. .coms typically need to be able to scale and contract on demand, so elasticity is an important thing. Integration with other products. So if you're building a storefront, there's obviously a backend that powers that storefront that you need to be cognizant of. Many of those scenarios are best suited by our on-premises products. So because we've deprecated public websites doesn't mean that we're divesting in WCM from a on-premises perspective. Now we're going to carry forward all of those WCM capabilities that we delivered in 2013 and earlier versions of SharePoint, and at the same time we're listening to your feedback to see what we can do to advance that particular scenario as part of SharePoint 2016. So I would definitely ask that you do submit your user voice feedback. Again, it's one of those things that we're looking at. And if there's something from a WCM perspective that you feel is missing that you would like to see, share your thoughts with us. We're always interested to see. But the moral of the story is I wouldn't look at what we've done in Office 365 as being indicative of our WCM objectives for on-premises.
I'd like to clarify some things as well on that topic of WCM, Bill. It seems to me that the, let's call it intranet WCM scenarios are starting to evolve with some of the new next-gen portals, the authoring environments, those kinds of things, providing some very interesting intranet WCM-like replacements, really, as opposed to solutions. But it does seem to me also that to reflect what Marwan is saying, that when you start looking at the .com scenario and using SharePoint as a public-facing site, that the investments on things like user tracking and cookies and SEO and those kinds of things haven't been there. Does Microsoft? So that's my perception. Does Microsoft look at WCM almost in two buckets? Let's say public-facing versus intranet, and say, okay, yeah, we're really focusing on one but not the other. What is the thinking that you can talk about?
Yeah, I think from a WCM perspective, is WCM is a relatively overloaded term, and it can mean a number of different things. And when we hear WCM, we hear WCM as representative of .coms. We hear WCM as being representative of intranets, and WCM is also representative of extranets. So we tend to look at WCM more broadly than just one discrete scenario. I think when most people think about WCM and ask us, are you going to advance WCM as part of SharePoint? Typically they're talking about .com type scenarios, so the digital marketing type scenarios, the storefront and e-commerce type scenarios, where when we hear WCM, we think more broadly about what that means. So we think extranet, intranet, and .com type scenarios. So that's why feedback is definitely important to us, so we can really isolate what the question is about. So if you say, hey, we'd like you to do more with WCM, definitely add a little context around what you mean by WCM, if it's extranet scenario, if it's an intranet scenario. But like I said, WCM is still an important part of SharePoint's heritage, an important part of SharePoint's heritage we'll bring forward, and then one of those things that we'll continue to look at as we move forward with SharePoint and understand the ways that people are using it. Will there be any expanded capabilities regarding analytics? That's a good question from Dave. The reason I wanted to grab that one real quick is because it just popped in. And we shared some great things at Ignite, and I don't know if you've been able to take a look at those to date. But if you look at the What's New for IT Professionals session, probably midway into the session, we talked a little bit about telemetry in SharePoint 2016 and what we endeavor to do there. And we showed some examples of some of the work that we've already done from a telemetry perspective. So I would definitely look at that. In user voice, again, analytics and statistics were two of the top 10 items that we've just recently marked as working on. So it's one of those things that we're actively doing through some of these new telemetry objectives that we have. So we'll give you greater insight into the way that SharePoint is being used inside of your business.
And I'd like to toss one of these questions specifically because it might take up some time here, and that is regarding social. What is the team's thinking at Microsoft regarding social specifically for on-prem scenarios, and as a nuance to that question, for only on-prem scenarios rather than hybrid? What's being brought forward? Is there going to be any additional investment? And are there any stories for on-prem environments that might have multiple farms and social spanning across farms? And then obviously there's the extension into hybrid where Yammer starts coming into play.
Yep, so from a social capabilities perspective, we're going to carry forward SharePoint Social as we delivered it in SharePoint 2013 to SharePoint 2016. So you'll still have those social capabilities available to you in 2016 that we delivered in 2013 with a number of different fixes that address performance, availability, and stability. Most notably, we've done a lot of work around distributed cache and the way it handles authentication between servers to increase its uptime and increase its availability. Obviously, the distributed cache doesn't only drive social features, but a number of other things within SharePoint. But the moral of the story is SharePoint Social from 2013 brought forward into 2016 with performance and availability improvements, as well as being just overall more stable. From a hybrid perspective, we're enabling you to follow sites and people and documents across cloud and on-premises. So one of the pieces of feedback we got with 2013 is I'm doing hybrid, but now I have two discrete data silos from a social perspective, which means if I follow a document on premises and I follow a document online, there's no affinity between the two. My profiles have no affinity to one another. So we're doing some hybrid work to address that. We call it hybrid team sites. So effectively now your site folders, as they exist on-prem and as they exist in the service, will be representative of both sites that you're a member of, whether that site's on-premises and or online. And it'll also be representative of people and documents, regardless of where they're stored. So if I follow somebody online and I follow somebody on-prem, they'll be represented in both locations as well. So that's kind of that cross-farm hybrid scenario that pulls the two together. From a Yammer perspective, we're going to continue to do work to integrate Yammer with SharePoint 2016. One of the early things that we did is obviously you'll still be able to replace the news feed with Yammer, much like we did in Service Pack 1 for SharePoint 2013. We've also added the ability now to post to Yammer from a on-premises document library. So with SharePoint 2016 in an on-prem library, you can click the document drop-down. From the context menu, you can post to Yammer. You can have document conversations, much like you can in the service, from a on-prem to Yammer perspective. So we're doing a number of different things to integrate Yammer. The question about two on-prem farms from a social perspective, that's not one that we've looked at to date. But again, we're very early in the development cycle. In kind of hybrid, we wanted to make a first-class citizen, so we started that work before we endeavored to do anything else.
I was really excited to hear about the hybrid team site situation, Bill, and I cheered you when you announced that. I think that's going to really help create a more seamless experience across on-prem and cloud. And very briefly, I remember you mentioned that there's also been there's going to be a lot of investment in creating a similar user experience so that the sort of friction between, wow, my on-prem sites and navigation works this way and my cloud sites and navigation work that way is going to be smoothed out. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we're definitely cognizant of. So we looked at hybrid in a number of different ways. And the first way that we looked at it is it shouldn't be motivated by migration. So as we thought about hybrid, developing hybrid scenarios, let's not be motivated by migration. Let's be motivated by enabling our on-premises customers to subscribe to cloud innovation, which in many cases means that you can continue to do all of your traditional SharePoint work on premises and manage your documents on premises, but you can sprinkle cloud innovation on top of it. So the Delve example was a great example of which, to where your on-prem content can participate in the power of the Office graph. So that was one of the examples. Hybrid team sites, to where you can continue to maintain kind of that high business impact information on-prem, but provide data mobility to your users and blend them together in a way that makes it more transparent. So our objective was, kind of the key thing that we wanted to do was let's abstract the cloud from users in a hybrid scenario to where they don't even realize they're working with the cloud. Today, if you think about some of the hybrid experiences, there's there's a very clear line of delineation between the two. It typically means, navigating to a new URL or opening up a new tab, but it's a very cognizant action. It's very conscious in the way that you do hybrid today. What we wanted to do is remove that to remove friction by just abstracting the cloud to where it exists, but you never know that you're using it.
A short, quick question here, Bill, for you. Are there any list view threshold increases for SharePoint Server 2016?
Yep, one of the things that we wanted to be able to do is just to provide a little history around the list view threshold. So the list view threshold was put into place in SharePoint to mitigate lock escalation that occurred within SQL Server. So when you request a view in SharePoint, effectively you're executing a query. And what happened is once you've started to reach SQL Server's threshold, you would have what we called a row lock escalate into a table lock, or fine-grained to coarse-grained locks, preventing anybody else within that particular content database from doing anything until the lock was freed. So we implemented a threshold to prevent that particular activity. In SharePoint 2016, we announced at Ignite that we are going to enable you to move beyond that 5,000 item limit threshold. So the list view threshold, you're no longer constrained by this 5,000 item limit. One of the things that we did is we mitigated the lock escalation scenario by redefining the way that a query is executed against the database itself. So common list view operations. We've really thought about the way our stored procedures run, the way the queries are executed, and the way that the results are populated to mitigate that. There's still going to be a threshold. So it's not going to be, now you can have a list view that's 30 million items in a list, which wouldn't make sense anyway, because you would scroll endlessly in order to see them all. But, the limit itself is we don't know what that's going to be yet. Probably in the next month or so, we'll have more announcements around what exactly it's going to look like. The reason we don't know what it's going to look like is because we still have to do the work to see, where is the bottleneck, and then that becomes a new threshold. It could be 5,001.
Bill, I know that question was from Kevin, by the way, so thank you, Kevin, for that excellent question. Bill, I know there was a question that was asked in the Yam Jam the other day, and I think this crowd would be interested in it, and that is the future of the free version of SharePoint Foundation. What is the future there?
So for SharePoint Foundation, one of the things that we announced in the Yam Jam is we're not going to sim ship or simultaneously ship SharePoint Server 2016 and SharePoint Foundation 2016. But Foundation remains an important component to SharePoint itself as part of the SharePoint family. What we're trying to do is figure out the right way to bring our customers forward. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden SharePoint Foundation dies. We're just looking for the right way to bring that particular scenario forward, which is why I solicited feedback from you, our customers, to figure out how are you using SharePoint Foundation today so we can figure out the right way to bring it forward. So, like I said, it doesn't mean that it's died. It means that we're not going to simultaneously ship SharePoint Foundation and SharePoint Server 2016 as you've seen in the past, and we're just looking for the right path forward for that particular scenario.
Thanks for clarifying that, because that's definitely been hyped over the last 2 days as, SharePoint Foundation is dead, and clearly it's not. So thank you for clarifying that. We're starting to run out of time. Are there one of the remaining questions that you want to tackle, Bill, specifically?
I'm looking at one here. I know there was one for a while from disaster recovery and the search service.
Yeah,
will there be any new improv? Yeah, that's actually a good one. So we've done a lot of work to make search easier to deploy and easier to manage, and as a result, it's easier to enable for high availability and disaster recovery purposes. So if you think about what we talked about at Ignite, about SharePoint 2016 being a cloud-inspired infrastructure, is one of the things that we endeavor to deliver on. That means that we've learned a lot from running SharePoint as a service over the course of the past 3 years at scale. And search, of course, is an aspect of those learnings, or running SharePoint at scale. We have to run search farms at scale. But we're also bound to an SLA that our customers expect us to deliver. So we've had to do a number of different things from a search perspective to enable high availability, to enable disaster recovery, to meet the expectations of our customers, and to meet the SLA that we publish as part of our service description and that we endeavor to reach and exceed every single day. The good news is all of that work accrues back to you on premises. So those things that we've done to enable us to deliver 3 nines and 4 nines with search are the same things that you're going to get to deliver 3 nines and 4 nines as part of search as well. And that kind of starts with some of the early investments that we've made in MinRoll that we'll spend in 2 weeks from now that we're going to spend a good 30 minutes on.
Awesome. Well, Bill, we are out of time, but if you want to take another question, it's your time. I want to be sensitive to, so we definitely have a few left. Otherwise, we can address these questions in future episodes and try to reach out to people directly.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and grab one last one before we sign off. Will the announcement about resource-based URLs for documents, will there still be a need for document IDs in 2016? For Kelvin, the way to think about resource-based URLs or what we've been talking about as a durable URL is that its foundation was founded on the concept of document ID. So you can look at document IDs as being the first step in the journey towards durable links or resource-based URLs. So the document ID service continues to exist. The concept of document IDs continue to exist, but they form the basis for a durable link. So effectively what we've done is much like we've evolved. When I talked about how we evolved Cobalt from being a client-server relationship to a server-server relationship, Cobalt was kind of the foundation for the future of data transfer across the SharePoint topology. Document IDs became the basis for durable links. So it became the foundation or the kernel for our durable links effort. And the good news is I've got a couple of blog posts that are going to be documenting all of these in detail that hopefully I'll be able to share over the next couple of weeks. But I think that was a great question there. So,
all right. Well, we're out of time then, Bill, and I'd like to thank you so much, as always, for your expertise and time. We will make this recording available very quickly for you guys. And so if you want to share this with your friends, you'll be able to send them to the same link you came to. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks from today, Bill. Anyone who wants to register for the next episode can use the link on the web links module on the far right. So, Bill, thank you so much. Hope you enjoy your time back at home with your family, and we'll look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
will do. Thanks, Dan.
Take care, everybody.